I gave 10 years of my life to that company, built it from the ground up, sacrificed weekends, birthdays, even my marriage. And in return, I got stabbed in the back, fired. 30 minutes before the biggest board meeting of my career, they thought they'd humiliate me, that I'd walk out quietly. But what they didn't know was that I'd already built my escape plan. And it didn't just save me. It flipped the entire company upside down. By the end of that day, I wasn't the one being fired. The CEO was. Where are you watching from? Because you're about to witness what happens when power, greed, and pride collide in one explosive boardroom. For me, it started with a cup of burnt office coffee, a missed call from my wife, and a sudden calendar notification titled, Board Meeting, Fun Mandatory. I'd been the chief operating officer at Crestvale Technologies for nearly a decade. When I joined, we were working out of a rented basement with flickering lights and second-hand desks. I remember those early days vividly. The late nights coding, the endless brainstorming sessions, fueled by vending machine snacks, the shared belief that we were building something revolutionary. And we were. Crestvale became one of the fastest growing tech startups in the valley. We built products that redefined automation, signed global clients, and pulled in investors who couldn't stop throwing money at us. At the heart of it all was me, the quiet force who made everything actually work. The CEO, Victor Lang, was the face, charming, confident, media, savvy. He loved the spotlight. I loved the numbers, the systems, the unseen gears that made our empire run. While he attended charity galas and luxury retreats, I handled the real backbone: operations, logistics, and people. My department ran like a symphony. Every quarter, our performance set new company records, and for years, that balance worked. He'd get the applause. I'd get the satisfaction of building something that mattered. But success changes people, and Victor? He started to believe the company was his alone. It began with small things. Uncredited presentations, deals I closed that he took full credit for. Then came the silencing. I wasn't invited to client calls anymore. Strategic decisions happened without me. My calendar started filling with meaningless performance reviews and internal audits. At first, I brushed it off. Corporate politics, it happens. But deep down, I could feel the shift. Something was coming. I tried to talk to him once, in private, told him I felt sidelined, that we were drifting from the company's core values. He gave me that fake smile of his, the one that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Relax, Ethan. You're overthinking again. You should focus on what you're good at. The paperwork." The paperwork. 10 years of sacrifice reduced to that one dismissive word. Weeks turned into months, and the tension grew. There were rumors, whispers about a possible merger, maybe even a buyout. Investors were restless, wanting new leadership to push the company into the public market. But Victor wasn't going to let go of control easily. And I wasn't going to sit quietly while he dragged everything I'd built down with him. That's when I started planning. Not revenge. Not yet. Just insurance. I began documenting everything. Financial reports, discrepancies in project budgets, off the books expenditures. I had a digital folder labeled Strategic Review, but anyone who knew what they were looking at would recognize it for what it really was. Leverage. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Transactions to a shell company under Victor's brother's name. Millions being funneled quietly out of the corporate account. Money that didn't belong to him. Money that belonged to us. That's when I realized. The man I'd once called my friend was robbing the company blind. But here's the thing about corporate predators. They never act alone. By the time I started investigating, I realized the rot ran deeper than just Victor. Half the board was either complicit or pretending not to see. And when corruption goes that high, you can't fight it from within. You have to burn it down and rebuild it from the ashes. So I built my plan slowly, quietly. I started forming connections outside the company with private investors, venture capitalists, and a few loyal colleagues who believed in me. It took 6 months, but I created a separate holding company under a trust, one that could legally acquire Crestvale shares without raising alarms. Every paycheck, every bonus, every extra cent I could spare went into buying shares from minor investors who wanted out. I didn't tell anyone, not even my wife. By the time Victor noticed, I owned a significant portion of Crestvale through that trust, enough to have a voice at the next board meeting. Then came that morning, the board meeting Subin mandatory notification that would change everything. It was supposed to be routine, quarterly review, project updates, future strategy. But as soon as I walked into the office, something felt off. The air was tense, the whispers louder than usual. People avoided eye contact. I can still remember the way the HR director looked at me, nervous, rehearsed, holding a manila envelope she didn't want to give me. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. The board has decided to move in a different direction, effective immediately." I stared at her, half laughing, half in disbelief. "You're firing me before the board meeting?" She nodded, eyes glassy. "Victor's orders. My badge was deactivated. My email access revoked. 10 years, gone with a signature." As I walked out of the office, I wasn't angry. I was calm, too calm, because in that moment, I realized Victor had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He thought firing me would erase me from the picture. He didn't know that I'd already positioned myself behind the curtain. The board meeting wasn't just about quarterly numbers. It was about the new leadership transition. The very merger Victor had been planning behind everyone's back. He thought he owned the votes. He didn't know that I owned the room. I watched from the parking lot as the luxury cars arrived, one by one. Each board member stepping out, several of them unknowingly holding proxies for my trust. I checked my phone. The official transfer of voting rights had gone through that morning, and for the first time in months, I smiled, because while they thought they'd fired me, they'd actually just handed me the keys to the entire company. The sun was setting behind the Crestvale building, painting the glass towers gold, the same towers I'd helped design when we first moved into our new headquarters. They said it symbolized a company built on transparency. If only they knew how ironic that would become. I sat in my car, staring up at those reflective windows, thinking about every hour I'd poured into that place. Every late night, every crisis I'd managed when Victor was nowhere to be found. Now, he thought I was gone for good, but tonight wasn't about loss. It was about balance. Because for the first time in years, I held real power. 2 months earlier, I'd started meeting privately with Crestvale's most frustrated investors. The ones tired of Victor's arrogance and the company's shifting moral compass. They didn't want scandal. They wanted security. I promised them both. I explained how Victor was siphoning money, hiding liabilities, and manipulating financials to inflate share value ahead of the merger. I didn't show them all the proof right away. Just enough to plant doubt, enough to make them listen. Then, quietly, I introduced them to the Crestvale Recovery Trust, my holding company. I told them I wanted to save the business from the inside. Most thought I was bluffing, until I showed them the numbers. Over a series of private meetings, in quiet coffee shops and hotel lobbies, signatures were made, shares transferred, and without Victor realizing, the company's foundation shifted beneath his feet. By the morning of the board meeting, I had control of 38% of Crestvale's total voting power, more than Victor himself. Back in my car, I checked my watch. 6:42 p.m. The meeting would start at 7. My heart was steady. I'd played this moment over in my head countless times, but still, this wasn't just revenge. This was reclamation. I wasn't the type to seek chaos. I believed in fairness, in work ethic, in order. But when you build something from nothing and watch someone else destroy it for greed, you stop playing nice. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my tie. The same navy blue one I wore the day the company launched. A quiet reminder of where this began. Security glanced at me as I entered the building. They didn't know I'd been fired just hours ago. The system hadn't updated yet. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment, I stood alone, watching my reflection in the mirrored wall. I didn't see a victim. I saw a man about to take back everything that was stolen from him. When I reached the executive floor, the atmosphere was tense. Assistants rushed papers back and forth. The conference room lights were blinding through the glass. I could hear Victor's voice echoing before I even opened the door. Confident, loud. The voice of a man who thought he'd already won. I waited until he finished his sentence before pushing the door open. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. Victor froze, mid-sentence. Disbelief etched across his face. "Ethan," I smiled. "Sorry, am I interrupting?" He blinked. You don't work here anymore." "Maybe not," I said, stepping closer. "But I'm still a shareholder, and as of this morning, a rather significant one." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, an older investor named Whitman, cleared his throat. "What's this about, Ethan?" Victor tried to regain control. "This man has been terminated. He's trespassing." I reached into my briefcase and placed a folder on the table. Neatly labeled Ownership Disclosure, Thivry Crestvale Recovery Trust. "I'm not trespassing," I said calmly. "I'm attending as the majority proxy holder of 38% of Crestvale's voting shares." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's smile faltered. "That's impossible." "Check the filings," I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him, the very one I used to sit in during operations meetings. "Everything went through at 9 a.m. Registrar's timestamp should confirm it." He grabbed his phone, scrolling furiously. I could see the panic forming behind his forced grin. Whitman spoke again. "Is this true?" I nodded. Every share was acquired legally, from investors who were tired of being lied to, from employees who wanted a future. The tension in the room became electric. Even Victor's allies shifted uncomfortably. For years, they'd trusted him. But greed has a smell, and right now, it was thick in the air. I leaned forward. "Let's not waste time. This meeting was called to discuss a merger, but before we proceed, I believe we need to address a matter of governance. Specifically, whether the current leadership is fit to continue representing Crestvale." Victor slammed his palm on the table. "This is outrageous. You were fired. You have no authority here." I didn't flinch. "You're right. I was fired by someone who no longer owns controlling interest, meaning your decision was invalid the moment those transfers went through." Gasps around the room. A few board members began whispering. Whitman leaned back, almost amused. Victor's confidence cracked. He looked around, realizing the votes weren't in his favor anymore. For the next hour, the board reviewed my evidence. Transaction records, hidden accounts, doctored reports. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented facts. By the end of it, the room was silent again, but this time, not out of shock. Out of fear. Fear of what they'd let Victor get away with. Fear of what the media would say if it ever got out. I stood, placing a final document on the table. Proposal for emergency leadership reassignment. Victor's jaw clenched. You can't be serious. I looked at him calmly. I am. And so are they. Whitman raised his hand first. I second the motion. One by one, hands lifted around the table. Each vote like a nail in the coffin Victor built himself. When it was done, I turned back to him. Effective immediately, I said quietly. You're relieved of your duties as CEO of Crestvale Technologies. He just sat there, speechless. For the first time, the man who'd ruled through ego and intimidation had nothing to say. Then, he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You think this is over, Ethan? You think you can handle what comes next? The lawsuits? The politics? I met his eyes. I don't need to handle everything. I just need to do what's right. He stood, shaking his head. You'll regret this. Maybe I would, but in that moment, as security escorted him out of the building he thought he owned, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The boardroom was quiet after he left. Some members congratulated me. Others stayed silent, calculating how to protect themselves. But I didn't care. Crestvale wasn't about power anymore. It was about restoring integrity to something that had lost its soul. I walked out onto the terrace, looking down at the city lights. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of loyalty, and finally, justice. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Victor wasn't the kind of man to disappear quietly. And in the weeks that followed, I'd learned that taking power is one thing, keeping it, that's another battle entirely. They say revenge ends when justice begins. But in business, justice is never clean. It's a war fought with emails, headlines, and stock prices. For a while, after that explosive board meeting, things seemed calm, too calm. Victor Lang, the man I'd dethroned, disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no press appearances, no statements. The media had caught wind of his sudden resignation. But Crestvale's legal team kept the story buried. Investors were told it was a peaceful transition, and the company stabilized, at least on paper. But behind closed doors, chaos was brewing. The first sign came 2 weeks later. An investor called me at 2 a.m., furious. Ethan, what the hell is going on with the numbers? Our overseas account just flagged $14 million missing. My blood ran cold. That money had been part of a development fund for our AI division. The same fund Victor had full access to before he was removed. I checked our internal systems. Sure enough, the account was drained, funneled through 3 offshore intermediaries. Victor had struck back. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting. Half the board was in shock. The other half looked ready to panic. The media hadn't caught on yet. But if this went public, it would destroy everything. I stared out the window during the chaos, jaw clenched. I knew Victor. He wasn't doing this for money. He was doing it to watch me suffer. To him, this wasn't about business. It was personal. I needed proof, and I knew exactly where to find it. Victor's old assistant, Lena Torres, had been with him for 5 years. Smart, loyal, but disillusioned by the end. I'd noticed her hesitation during my final months at the company. The way she'd flinch when Victor yelled, the way she'd avoid eye contact during meetings. So I called her. She didn't answer the first time, or the second, but late that evening she called back. Her voice was shaky. Ethan, I shouldn't be talking to you. I know, I said softly. But I think Victor's trying to destroy Crestvale, and I think you already know that. Silence. Then, a sigh. You have no idea how far he's gone. We met in a dimly lit cafe on the edge of the city. She looked exhausted, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. After you were fired, she began. Victor started transferring files, not company data, personal records, emails, recordings, anything that could be used against the board. He said he was building a safety net. My stomach tightened. You mean blackmail? She nodded. He's been collecting evidence for years. Deals, side payments, bribes. Half the board is dirty. He said, if they ever turned on him, he'd take them all down. And now he's going to take me down with them. I muttered. She slid a USB drive across the table. I made a copy before he left. Everything's on here. The offshore accounts, the communications, even recordings of him talking about how he'd ruin you. I stared at it, that tiny device that could save or destroy everything. You're giving this to me? She nodded slowly. I'm done being afraid of him. That night, I barely slept. I plugged the drive into my laptop and spent hours scrolling through files, each one worse than the last. Victor had been planning this for months. He'd built a network of shell companies and fake vendors, all funneling money out of Crestvale, and in one of the recorded calls, he laughed, as he said, let Ethan clean up the mess. By the time he realizes what I've done, he'll be sitting in the ashes. I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I could expose him right then. Go to the authorities, call the press, burn his name to the ground. But that would destroy Crestvale too. And I couldn't let that happen. Not to the company I built, so instead, I decided to trap him. The next day, I called an emergency shareholder meeting. I told the board we were conducting an internal audit to trace the missing funds. Publicly, it looked like standard damage control. Privately, it was bait, because I knew Victor was still watching, monitoring Crestvale from the shadows, waiting for me to slip. I needed him to think I was desperate, that I didn't have enough proof, and it worked. Within a week, a burner email arrived in my inbox. No name, no greeting, just one line, you don't deserve what I built. Attached was a single corrupted file, one of the very reports I'd found on Lena's drive, now doctored to implicate me in the missing funds. He was trying to turn the story around, to frame me as the thief, but he made one fatal mistake. He sent it from a proxy address. That traced back to one of his shell companies, the same one Lena had already exposed. It was over. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal filings and press coordination. I turned the entire dossier, every document, every recording, every transaction, over to the corporate fraud division and our legal counsel. When the story broke, it hit every major outlet simultaneously. Former Crestvale CEO investigated for fraud and embezzlement. Stock prices dipped for a moment, but then began to rise again, because for once the company wasn't hiding. We faced it head-on with truth, and the world saw the difference. 3 days later, I received a call. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Ethan, Victor's voice rasped through the line. You really think you've won? I didn't respond. He continued, bitter and broken. You think these people care about you? They'll use you just like they used me. You'll see. Maybe, I said quietly. But at least I can look in the mirror when it's over. There was a long pause. Then, a quiet, chilling laugh. You took my company, but you'll never be free of me. The line went dead. A week later, he was arrested at a private airstrip trying to leave the country. Fraud, embezzlement, obstruction. The works. The image of him being escorted by federal agents flashed across every business channel. The man who thought he was untouchable was finally caught, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But victory rarely feels like triumph. When I walked through the Crestvale halls the next morning, employees cheered. They called me a hero, a savior, but all I felt was tired. I'd spent a decade fighting for this company, and in the process, I'd lost pieces of myself I could never get back. My marriage was gone. My friends, distant. My soul, heavier. And as I looked out the window from the CEO's office, his old office, I realized something painful. In defeating Victor, I'd become a version of him, not corrupt, not cruel, but consumed. The climax of revenge isn't always an explosion. Sometimes it's a whisper, the quiet understanding that you've paid a price you can't undo. But I wasn't done yet, because Victor's fall was just the beginning of something bigger. I wasn't just going to take over Crestvale, I was going to rebuild it, in a way that made sure no one like Victor Lang could ever rise again. And that meant facing the final hardest step of all. Letting go of revenge itself. The morning after Victor's arrest, Crestvale's headquarters felt hollow. No shouting from executives, no fake smiles, no overpolished speeches about innovation or synergy. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, the kind that feels like both destruction and rebirth. I walked into the office alone. No cameras, no reporters, no applause, just the quiet hum of the servers. The same machines we'd once built by hand in a dusty garage. 10 years ago, those servers represented dreams. Now, they were ghosts of what we'd lost. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and stood by the window, overlooking the city. For years, I'd imagined what this moment would feel like. Victory, justice, freedom. But standing there, I realized something nobody ever tells you about revenge. When you finally get what you wanted, you don't feel free. You just feel empty. The following weeks were chaos. Legal teams scrambled to stabilize what Victor had broken. Public relations worked overtime to repair the company's image, and the board, now stripped of its corrupt members, begged me to officially take over as CEO. At first, I refused. I didn't want the title. I didn't want the power that had poisoned Victor. But then, I thought about the hundreds of employees whose lives depended on Crestvale. The engineers, the interns, the families who believed in what we'd built. If I walked away now, I'd be abandoning them just like Victor abandoned me. So, I accepted, but with one condition: Crestvale would no longer be a company built on greed. It would be a company built on trust. My first act as CEO wasn't about money or investors. It was about transparency. I opened every ledger, every record, every financial statement to public audit. Employees could see exactly where the money went and where it didn't. No secrets, no games. Next, I dissolved Victor's entire executive structure and rebuilt leadership from within. No more suits who climbed ladders for personal gain. I promoted those who'd stayed loyal when it mattered most. The people who believed in the work, not the politics. One of them was Lena. She became head of compliance, the same department Victor used to manipulate. She was nervous at first, but when she stepped into that new office, I saw something I hadn't seen in her before: pride. And in that moment, I realized maybe redemption isn't found in payback. Maybe it's found in giving good people the chance to rise again. The months passed, and slowly, Crestvale began to heal. Our reputation returned stronger than before. Investors who once doubted us came back. But the change wasn't in the numbers, it was in the atmosphere. People started smiling again. Team leaders listened instead of dictated. Meetings weren't battles, They were collaborations. For the first time in years, the company felt alive. I'd walk through the halls and see engineers staying late, not because they were afraid, but because they believed in what we were doing again. They didn't call me sir. They called me Ethan, and that was enough. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in neat handwriting I recognized immediately. Victor. Inside was a single page. You took everything I had, but you'll realize soon. Power doesn't destroy people, it reveals who they've always been. Let's see who you become. No threats, no insults, just a challenge. I stared at the paper for a long time before folding it neatly and locking it away in my desk drawer. Not as a reminder of hate, but as a reminder of what I'd escaped, because Victor was right about one thing. Power does reveal people, and I was determined to make sure it revealed the best version of me. 6 months later, Crestvale was ranked among the most trusted companies in the industry. We launched an open source initiative, giving small startups access to our technology. We set up scholarships for young engineers from underprivileged backgrounds. And for the first time in company history, we became employee-owned. That was my final move, to give the power back to the people who earned it, to make sure no single person, not even me, could ever control it again. When I announced the transition, the entire office erupted in cheers, but I didn't smile right away, because deep down, I knew this was my goodbye. Crestvale no longer needed me, and that was the greatest success I could have hoped for. The night I stepped down, I took one last walk through the office. The lights were dim, the hallways quiet, every corner held memories of ambition, betrayal, pain, and triumph. I stopped by the main conference room, the same place where I'd been fired, the same room where I'd taken back everything. And for a moment I just stood there. Not in anger, not in pride, just gratitude. I whispered to the empty room. We made it. Then I turned off the lights. When I left the building, the sky was painted orange and violet. The city below shimmered, alive and indifferent. I walked to my car, took a deep breath, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the peace of revenge, a peace of release, because revenge might give you justice, but letting go, that gives you freedom. And as I drove away from the company I'd built, destroyed and rebuilt again, I realized the truth that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't firing the person who ruined you. It's living well enough that they never mattered again.